My name is Wendell Anderson, and I'm an 80-year-old retiree living in the state of Florida here and enjoying the beauty of life as it is in the state of comfort and pleasantry. I'm going to tell you today a story about a kid of 17 years of age. That was me. At 17, I was wanting to be joining the United States Navy as a combat pilot during World War II. And in so doing, I had my mommy's permission to join the U.S. Navy after a lot of coercing her to sign my release so that I could be accepted as a juvenile into the United States Navy. And so in 1943, I was in September when I finally was able to enter the procedure of becoming a serviceman under the U.S. Navy. And during our physical examinations, one of the doctors said, "Wait a minute, fellow, that you're so colorblind, you can't become a naval participant, a personnel of the U.S. Navy." "For what reason?" I said, and he said, "The fact colorblindness is the basis for our entire naval control, and that is a port and starboard light, and your port light is red and your starboard is green, and these have a tendency to switch." So he says, "That's a dangerous omen for a fellow like you that wants to be in the Navy." So now then, what I wanted to do is, I wanted to be a pilot of a Corsair aircraft. And because I enjoyed the view of that gull wing and coming from the plains of Illinois, how we used to watch the various birds fly, and I wanted to be a flyer. But I can't be. So somebody said in the background, "Hey fellow, we're going to make you a United States Naval CB." "Whoa, what is a CB?" I said. And I'm looking over here and a fellow says, "Hey man, they are shock troopers." A shock trooper? And that's the fellow they said that goes and leads and brings your tanks and your bulldozers in on the shore first and make a way for the waves of Marines or soldiers that are going to be coming ashore. Well, that's the answer to my life as being a United States Naval CB. And so after the boot training and all of the necessary rifle range trainings and the indoctrination into how the Navy lives and works, I became a CB, in which nobody knew who they were or what they were, but that's what I was. And we finally ended up in Guinea, California, which is a port of debarkation. And that port is where all of the supplies that a construction battalion called CB has to gain all of its pontoons, its lumber, its trucks, and its cranes, and its bulldozers, and even some machine guns. And so we had to load this crude ship called the it was called the HMS Torrens. It was a Norwegian vessel that was commandeered by the United States Navy as running some of our troops to the South Pacific, because Norway was part of the Axis format, and of course we were the Allies. So we finally were aboard this ship, and I was accompanying a bunch of old men. I'll bet you they were from 30 to 45 years of age. And however, these men have been construction people all through their life, and so they're very, very well learned in how to build a dock and how to build an airfield or how to build a hospital. So now then, we're on this port of Guinea, and out they had even a band on the docks bidding us goodbye. And so here I am on this thing, is going to the South Pacific, I guess, because we had to assume only where we were going. And we headed due south, straight south, below the equator, toward the Christmas Islands in the South Pacific. And from there we made our turn, and we were then bordering on into the Hebrides, and we finally arrived at an anchoring spot off of Guadalcanal and across the island from Cristobal. It's sort of a pathway between the two islands. And so we sat there for a few days, and then I think it was Admiral Halsey that he and his war planners said that let's get this 33rd outfit, let's move them down to the southern tip of New Guinea. And so then we traveled out again, traversing these small islands, and we arrived at Melanie Bay in the southernmost tip of New Guinea. Interesting for a young lad of 17 to see how a jungle looks, or see how people are living in these small islands and so on. But Melanie Bay was an interesting place to be. And what we did there was we disembarked, and then we planned to build a campsite there. And for what reason, this kid didn't know. But anyway, we hadn't been with a shower in maybe a month, being aboard that His Majesty ship, the Torrens. And so what we did is we found a waterfall that was just outside of our campsite, and we all said, golly, let's go have a shower underneath that lovely little waterfall. And so that we did, and we felt very refreshed. But here's an interesting facet of that shower. There was a young native lady, and she was very attractive, as all of the old South Pacific scenes have shown. She was out without any breast cover, and she had a sarong around her waist. And she looked at our shirts, we had some green shirts on, and we had them laying on the palm leaves on the side. And what she pointed to, like she says, gimme. In other words, she was trying to say, gimme the shirt. And so I said, I had a couple of shirts in my bag back at the pup tent. And so therefore I said, well, she's maybe going to put the shirt on. That'll be an interesting dress for her. And so at the time she took the green shirt, and she proceeded to throw her sarong off and puts the shirt around her waist and ties a knot with the arms that, of course, are part of the shirt. Culture, system, new people that we have met, it certainly was shocking. But anyway, from that point on, we began to feel what it was like to be living in the jungles. And you had the insects, and you had the fevers that came with them. And so what happened there is that the first thing I was contracted is the case of malaria. And that was awesome. But then there's another little case of dengue fever that came along that was worse than malaria. And so we were all a bunch of sick boys there for a long time. And but finally then, we were instructed to load our ship back up again. And it seemed like just yesterday we unloaded it, but now we're loading it back up again, and we're heading for Hollandia, which is a city or a community, or it's basically a harbor located in the upper north half of New Guinea. What we were doing, in total assumption again, is sort of moving ourselves northward so that we would be, as troops and the battalions, we will be building bases for our military as we become stronger and become a part of the operation to retrieve the Philippines and also to go on into Japan. It was very, very hot at Hollandia because that community sits right on the equator, and we were all confined to the ship. And of all things, 1,000 men on a little steel bathtub is not very comfortable. And so of course, we suffered from a lot of things, like the fact the heat was bothering us, the gnats and so on were flying into our cabins, or I mean our bunk space. And but what we did was we suffered along. And finally, MacArthur, I guess, and the admirals got together with the idea that our ship will be joined by about 30 other ships, and we'll form a convoy and head for the Philippine Islands. Now this will be the invasion of the Philippines, which was in October of 1944. And now realizing since leaving the States, it's been almost a year in transport to getting to this location. So we're a little eager to do something and to get off of this ship business and also to become more seabee. So now then what happened is that we finally got underway from Hollandia, and we were in convoy at 6 knots. I think we walk at 7 knots, so it's quite slow. And so the first thing we encounter, naturally, is the Japanese. And he had his favorite little aircraft called the Zero. And from the Zero, he would be coming out of the clouds, he would be coming out of the sun, and attacking with a machine gun, as well as dropping his bomb and trying to, of course, I would say that if I heard the pilots of those Zeros talking, they would say, let's get this convoy out of the way. And you know, they practically exceeded, for reason being that a number of the ships going at 6 knots were easily targeted by these aircraft. And in so doing, we have seen the ships go up in smoke, and of course they lose their power and they have to drop out of the convoy, and they become very much sitting ducks for the submarine that was laying in wait, just like a shark after a nice piece of bait. But anyway, we continued on our way, and soon we were arriving at the harbor of Leyte. And the Leyte harbor there wasn't much event going into this harbor. For what reason? I think the Japanese were concentrating on other areas in the Pacific, and as well as concentrating on the northern parts around Manila, Corregidor. And so here's Leyte, a virgin port, and our ships, we pulled in there, and now then it became the invasion. Almost uneventful. For what reason? That there were just no Japanese enemy in the area. Very few of them. So we proceeded to get into Tacloban and immediately unload for some of the equipment. And the bulldozers were busy clearing the way because we wanted an airfield immediately, as soon as possible. And we had a saying within the Seabees that, you know, the impossible takes a minute longer. And that's what we seem to prove to Mr. MacArthur, or General MacArthur. So here we are with making land base at Tacloban in a rice paddy in Leyte, and everything quiet, and all of a sudden, December 5 of 1944, here comes the Japanese returning to the Philippines themselves. And so we had a couple of baby aircraft carriers that were working off of Samar and on the Pacific side of the Philippines, and they were both hit with all their aircraft, which means those baby tops carried approximately 25 to 30 aircraft, and they were all in the sky. So we had something like 60 aircraft up there working the shoreline and so on, backing up our positions, because the Japanese were coming in from around the north, the lee side of the Leyte Island. And it was a fierce battle that night, because this kid was sitting on the upper decks, because I just wanted maybe to see the action, and I could hear the tinkling of the steel hanging, bouncing off of my helmet. And because the number of explosions in the air was constant, because we were firing those 5-inch cannon off of most of the ships that were sitting in harbor and protecting our ships. And but we were being attacked pretty viciously there for that entire night. And then, of course, we were on the island the next evening, and what happened at that time was here we are with looking for the defense of our boys around the airfield that we had started to construct. And so the defense was that the Navy, or the Seabees, were on one side, and then the Army was on the other side of this strip that we had cut out through the jungle. And of all things, a Japanese paratrooper came in about 6 p.m. with 3 of their DC-3s. And they dumped some paratroopers on us, and of course they went in with torches and lit a couple of Piper Cubs that we used for scouting aircraft. And that was the essence of it, because nobody was on the airfield hardly, for reasons that it was incomplete. But here are some 30, on that next day or so, the 30 aircraft off of off of these baby tops that were in the skies over Leyte. They had to land because they had, excuse me, they had no place to go. And so many of them were young pilots, like which I wanted to be. And one of them came in at the airfield, and what he was saying is that, you know, how do I land this thing? And of course he's dragging the hook that they used when they went onto the carriers, and he dragged his hook behind him, and he sat down, and what would he do with the hook? He tore up all of that matting that we had laid down on the rice paddy, so the next aircraft could not use it because it tore up their wheels, their tires, and they did flips, they did skids, they did rolls, and I think we lost most of those aircraft because some of them even tried to, none of them I think were entertained as being proficient in parachuting, so none of them wanted to jump out of their parachute, out of their craft. But some landed on the airstrip and they were destroyed, and so on. But the battle for Leyte at that time, I think, made its good turn, because I think it was Halsey out there in the straits, and he was keeping all of those battleships away from us, and so things seemed to be the big turn of the war when Art MacArthur turned and returned to Leyte, to the Philippines. So then what happened is, after we had that skirmish on that airfield, a number of Army men were fatally injured by it, because we did have the skirmish was between the two of the American troops. For what reason? It was by mistake. They didn't know who was who. And so we lost a number of men. MacArthur the next day or so said, I don't want to see another Marine or a Seabee on this island by 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. So we had to vacate the place again, and we went on into the ship and back over to Samar. Samar was the big island that's located at the eastern end of the Leyte harbor. And there in Samar we made our home for the next year and a half almost, and there we built a huge airfield for the Red Raiders, which was the 5th Air Force of the 13th, let's see, it was the 5th Air Force, 13th, well, the 13th, whatever. And it was the 13th Air Force, the 5th Bomb Groups, and they were all Liberators, B-24s, and they did a lot of the work of relieving or, say, recapturing Manila bases, because of the Corregidor was the home of the prisons for all of our troops that were captured by the Japanese when they invaded the Philippines a couple of years before that. So our program then became this, that we were troops that built a large base for the Navy, for the 7th Fleet, and we had some very interesting occasions of happenings, like even one night we had I was on a Christmas night of that 44 when Tokyo rose. She said that we're sending you fellows a Christmas present. And so coming with the Christmas present was, we didn't realize what it would be, but we were alerted, and it happened to be a single bomber, and I think that's all they could skirmish or put together was a single bomber. And he came in with a flight that would be shutting his engines off and coasting in and dropping his bomb toward a hospital ship because it was lit. And he went up over the top of that hospital ship, and of course he could not seemingly restart his engines to escape the flight. So therefore, that fellow was captured by us, and we must say that he was exterminated. But we do have many things happening on that island. The animals, the lizards, the dragons, the Filipinos, the way they lived and all that became so interesting for us. And we became, of course, naturally instant diplomats of the United States by telling them all of our things. We acted like a bunch of missionaries, that we were showing them how we lived, and we really should have tried to adhere to how they lived because we were their guest. But all these things were a part of being a CB Marine by the United States Navy, and we had so many exciting and interesting episodes happening there that it's almost too lengthy to get into, but the history was one of just great knowledge, great learning, and it was probably, I would say, one of the greatest excursions that this young lad could have ever had, because he learned how to build, how to live with people. He learned all of the facets that make for great strength in a man. So then that was getting down to we were winding down the war, and of course there was this fellow called Harry Truman. After Roosevelt had died, President Harry Truman was our leader, and he was the master of our armed forces. And Mr. Truman sent a bomb to Eniwetok, and that bomb was put aboard a B-29. And from that bomb, he went over to Hiroshima, or was it Nagasaki or such, and he released that bomb, and you know, that bomb was the deciding factor that this young lad would have had to been one of the major invasion force going into Japan for the consummation of that war. And I have to say that Harry Truman truly saved my life.